we're here in Rio de Janeiro, and I guarantee you this will be an unforgettable experience as you get to taste the food, the culture, have experiences with the historical aspect of Brazil. That's right, one of the major parts of the African diaspora. And guess what? We want you to join us here in Brazil. The views are amazing, the food is spectacular, and the experience is unforgettable. And the only thing that's missing is you. Join us.
Welcome to the Africa Diaspora News Channel, family. My name is Lynient Akotonou, making this report. For nearly 80 years, the US dollar has been the king in global trade and global finance. Almost every oil barrel, every trade deal, every international loan priced in dollars. But right now, a coalition of nations representing nearly half the world's population is working to change that. And by this coalition, we're talking about Brics. These 5 economies came together and said they've had enough of playing by the Washington's rule. They're tired of banking on the dollar, depending on the dollar, and they're about to change that. They've done so many things in the past months, and we're going to check it out. At the 2025 summit in Rio de Janeiro, Indonesia officially joined along with 11 new partner nations. So added to these 5 nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, Kazakhstan is now a part of Brics, Vietnam, Nigeria, and Indonesia. So from Nigeria to Vietnam to Kazakhstan, Brics now nearly represents 48% of the global population, and we know what that means. That gives this movement serious weight if you're to consider it from all angles, right? And their message is getting louder and clearer. We don't want to depend on the dollar anymore. We want to be self-dependent. We do not want to bank on President Donald Trump, the US dollar, the US rule, Washington's rule. We want to have what we call our own. Now, family, when Russia was cut off from the SWIFT payments after Ukraine invasion, they knew that it was time to take it to another level. It was actually a wake-up call for the entire global south because we've seen how the US weaponizes their dollar. Yes, we know that, family, how that President Donald Trump does this, imposes tariffs, 10%, 90, 80 on these nations. And at some point, Washington wanted them to play by their rules. If you do not depend on the dollar, if you don't do this, at some point they said that if they should abandon the dollar, that they would be sanctioned. Imagine that. US went as far as imposing sanctions on these countries because they wanted something of their own, something to call theirs. And guess what? Brics is no longer gonna submit to the US or Washington's rule. They now want something that would make them independent. They don't want to depend on the US dollar. Family, as Russia President Vladimir Putin puts it, he said, "We are not refusing, not fighting the dollar, but if they don't let us work with it, what can we do?" We then have to look for other alternatives. And that is exactly what they are doing, family. The US dollar is fastly becoming a weapon, a weapon in trade, a weapon in global finance, and they are tired of it. I mean, it's just becoming too much. And that is why, when President Donald Trump, when they weaponize the US dollar, make it look as though they do not have other alternative, it further proves the point that we need to look for other alternative. Now, if you make it easy for them, they wouldn't look for other alternative. But when it becomes a weapon that you use to bend them to your rule, to act in certain ways you want them to, come on, they start looking for alternatives. If there were no problems, if there were no troubles in paradise, trust me, they wouldn't look for alternatives. But the US dollar has made it impossible for them to depend on it. Now, family, what are they actually building? This is where it gets concrete. Let's check it out. First, Brics Pay, a decentralized payment system designed to let member nations trade with each other without touching the dollar or SWIFT. Think of it as their own financial messaging network. Now, the second is CIPS, that's China's cross-border interbank payment system. As of early 2025, CIPS links nearly 4,800 banks across 185 countries. Now, you know what that means? That is no small. It's still smaller than SWIFT though, but it's growing fast. Now, thirdly, the Brics unit. In October 2025, a pilot program launched 100 units, a settlement tool that backed 40% by gold and 60% by a basket of Brics currencies. It's essentially a prototype for a Brics reserve asset. Fourth, the new development bank. This bank disbursed $30 billion in 2024 with a growing share of loans issued in local currencies rather than dollars, cutting out dollar-denominated debts entirely. Now in 2025, this year, under India's Brics presidency, Russia, China, and India are working to interlink their digital currencies. Now, these currencies from different countries, created by different countries, are being joined together. So they are looking for a way to make sure these digital currencies are interlinked. The digital ruble, the digital yuan, the digital rupee, creating a linked central bank digital currencies that could settle cross-border trade instantly without a dollar in sight. Now, we talked about Africa, how that Africa is working on ditching the US dollar, creating a currency that would favor the global Africa. Now, the thing is, we asked the question when we talked about it, that is it possible for Africa, based on our history, the corruption level, and everything we know about Africa, how that these leaders only do what they want for themselves, their pockets, their families, they do not care about the people. Is it possible? We know it's going to benefit Africa, going to do well for Africa, but is it possible? Now, this is what Brics is actually trying to achieve, because trust me, family, Washington's rule is something else, and it's becoming unbearable for some of our leaders. While we know that having a currency that is good for the Brics nations and even Africa, the thing is, can we keep up? Now, family, let's look at the numbers. Dollar still accounts for 59% of global exchange foreign reserves as of 2024. So, apparently, it is still on the throne. It hasn't been dethroned. But the thing is, the trend line is moving. Now, Vladimir Putin said that 90% of bilateral exchange between Brics nations are done in national currencies, bypassing the dollar, of course. China and Russia conducted most of their bilateral exchange in yuan and rupees. And we know what that means. But the question is, will Washington just sit down and allow them to be truly independent? Will they really allow them to do what they want to do, find an alternative for the dollar? Or they would fight back? Now, what did Washington do? Washington fought back, right? They threatened to impose 100% tariffs on any country that bypasses the dollar. And it's working in a way, family, partially, I would say, because India has openly and publicly distanced itself from the aggressive de-dollarization rhetoric. So the Indian foreign minister said, and I quote, "I do not believe we have any policy to have a replacement to the dollar." But this is the irony, family. Trump is trying to bring them close, make sure they are still God. Washington wants to be God over all these countries and nations, but their action is further proving the point that they need an alternative. They need an alternative. You can't fully be dependent on the dollar, and then there are threats and sanctions imposed when you try to bypass or just do something else without involving the dollar. Trump's tariff policies might actually be accelerating what he's trying to avoid. When the US imposed tariffs on India and Brazil for partnering with Russia, Brics nations thought, oh well, right now we need to look for an alternative. And every time the dollar is weaponized, it further proves the point that an alternative is needed. At this point, we need an alternative. But the question is Washington just sitting down, looking at them? So, family, is the dollar doomed? Not tomorrow, because there are advantages. We're talking about liquid markets, stable institutions, global trust built over decades. No rival currency comes close overnight. We're talking about building dominance for decades. 20, 40, over nearly 80 years, family. Now, it will take a whole lot. It will demand a whole lot. Freedom comes at a cost. It comes at a price, and they should be ready to pay this price, right? It wouldn't come freely, because President Donald Trump, Washington is trying to make sure that US remains the go-to, the dollar remains the go-to in global trade. And at the same time, we see that China is rising. China is trying to prove to every other country that we can be the partner you need. We can give you what you need. But President Trump doesn't want that. We saw what happened with Burkina Faso partnering with Russia. We saw the imposed tariffs. Today's global economy is multipolar in production and trade. But the thing is, it is still unipolar in its finance system, the dollar. And that is the gap Brics is trying to close. They are trying to bridge this gap, that we can be independent instead of totally depending on the dollar. And if this succeeds, even partially, This is what it's going to do. It means a world where the US can no longer fund itself cheaply because everyone needs the dollar. It means higher borrowing costs for the US, a weaker greenback, and a loss of what economists call America's exorbitant privilege. America wants to be on top, always at the top. Trump wants that, Washington wants that, but the thing is, will Brics really have its way this time around? Will it work? I remember there was a story we talked about Africa trying to create one currency that would work for them. While we said it's a good initiative, will it work? Because you know how that these African leaders are greedy, they are corrupt. But would they even be given that chance to do that? Because we know how the US dollar dominates the global trade. What do you have to say about the story, family? Comment your thoughts. Would they achieve this? Would it be possible for them to achieve this? Comment your thoughts and do not forget to share, like, subscribe, and turn on your notification button. My name is Lynient Akotonou. Thank you for watching.